In our last journey, we watched the Imperium tear itself in half. We saw Horus, the most beloved son, turn against his father and plunge the galaxy into civil war. We witnessed the siege of Terra, the Emperor's mortal wounding, and his eternal imprisonment on the Golden Throne. We traced the scouring and the disappearance of the Primarchs, leaving humanity to govern itself without the demigods who'd built the Empire. Tonight, we face something more insidious than outright rebellion, more terrible than any single war. We're going to trace 10,000 years of slow decay, the gradual transformation of everything the Emperor built into everything he feared, the metamorphosis of a rational, secular empire into a theocratic nightmare that survives not through strength, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to die. This is the age of the Imperium. M32 to M41. 10 millennia compressed into an hour. Wars that lasted centuries reduced to paragraphs. Civilizations that rose and fell getting only their names remembered. Because in the vastness of the Imperium's history, even catastrophes become routine. Even existential threats become just another entry in the endless catalog of survival. So settle in. The night is long, and we're going to understand how hope dies. Not all at once, not in a single moment of betrayal, but slowly, gradually, one compromise at a time, one necessary atrocity after another, until what remains is an empire that runs on faith, fear, and the daily sacrifice of millions. Let me tell you how the Imperium learned to survive, and what that survival cost. The heresy ended, but its consequences had only begun. Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, looked at the shattered Imperium and saw a fundamental problem that needed solving. Power concentration had enabled the heresy. Horus commanded tens of thousands of Space Marines. When he fell, he took all of them with him. The same was true for every traitor Primarch. Entire legions corrupted because their genetic father betrayed the Emperor. This couldn't be allowed to happen again. Guilliman's solution was codification, organization, the systematic restructuring of the Space Marine legions into something more manageable, more controllable, less capable of threatening the Imperium if they fell. He wrote the Codex Astartes. It's hard to overstate how important this document became. It wasn't just a military manual, though it was that. It wasn't just organizational theory, though it contained that too. The Codex became the foundation for how the Imperium understood warfare, honor, duty, and the Space Marines' place in the greater whole. The core principle was simple. No single commander should ever again control enough Space Marines to threaten the Imperium. Each legion would be divided into chapters of approximately 1,000 battle brothers. Each chapter would be autonomous, self-sufficient, capable of operating independently for centuries without outside support, but small enough that their loss, or worse, their corruption, would be containable. Each chapter would claim its own home world, recruit from its own population, develop its own traditions and culture within the framework of the Codex. They would be united by purpose and gene seed lineage, but separated by distance and doctrine. The Codex specified everything: company organization, squad composition, tactical doctrines for different battlefield scenarios, rules of engagement, even paint schemes and heraldry. Guilliman believed that if you controlled the framework, you controlled the possibilities. That standardization was safety. Some Primarchs embraced the Codex immediately. Corax saw the wisdom. His Raven Guard had been shattered at Istvan V anyway. Dividing what remained into chapters that could rebuild independently made sense. Others resisted. Rogel Dorn fought Guilliman over it. His Imperial fists had defended Terra. They'd held the palace walls when everything else was falling. They'd bled and died to keep the Emperor alive. And now they were being told to break apart, to divide and diminish. It felt like punishment for loyalty, like being told they couldn't be trusted. The argument between Dorn and Guilliman grew heated. Almost came to blows. Two Primarchs who'd both remained loyal, who'd both sacrificed everything for the Emperor, now at each other's throats over how to rebuild. The compromise was reached through exhaustion rather than agreement. Dorn would comply. The Imperial fists would split. But he did it grudgingly, and the successor chapters maintained closer ties to the parent legion than most. The Black Templars, the Crimson Fists, others. All carried the legacy of Dorn's stubbornness forward into the millennia. The Space Wolves barely complied at all. They created exactly 2 successor chapters, the Wolf Brothers and one other, and when those foundings proved unstable, the Canis Helix, the genetic modification that made them Space Wolves, didn't transplant well. They said, "See, we told you it wouldn't work," and continued operating as essentially a legion under a different name. The Dark Angels split, but maintained secrets across all their successors. The Unforgiven, they called themselves collectively, because they shared shame that couldn't be divided by organizational restructuring. Half their original legion had turned traitor on Caliban, and that sin was carried by every successor chapter. But most chapters accepted the Codex, embraced it even. The Ultramarines created more successor chapters than any other legion. The Blood Angels split and maintained strong ties. The Salamanders, small to begin with, created only a handful of successors and kept close contact. The Second Founding, as it's called, created hundreds of new chapters, each one carrying the gene seed of a Primarch who would never meet them. Each one inheriting a legacy they'd have to define for themselves. And in the millennia that followed, more foundings would occur. The Third Founding, the Fourth, numbered all the way up to the 26th Founding in M41, the Cursed Founding, where genetic experimentation created chapters that were powerful but unstable. By M42, there would be roughly 1,000 chapters scattered across the galaxy. 1,000,000 Space Marines total, give or take. Each chapter its own little empire. Each one carrying the weight of history and the burden of being more than human, but less than the Primarchs who created them. The Codex Astartes became holy text. Not officially, the imperial cult would provide the actual holy texts, but in practice. Chapters who followed it precisely called themselves Codex Compliant and looked down on those who deviated. Chapters who maintained their own traditions were called divergent, a term that carried implications of potential heresy. Arguments about codex interpretation would rage for 10,000 years. Were 10 Marines in a squad mandatory, or could you run 9 if tactical doctrine suggested it? Could you paint your armor different colors for specific campaigns? How much cultural variation was acceptable before it became dangerous deviation? These debates might seem trivial. They weren't. Because in an empire where innovation was heresy and change was corruption, precedent was everything. The Codex provided precedent, and precedent was the only thing preventing total fragmentation. Guilliman had built a framework that would hold the Space Marines together across 10 millennia of isolation and drift. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And in the Imperium, works is the highest praise anything can receive. While Guilliman reorganized the military, someone had to govern. The Emperor couldn't. He sat immobile on the golden throne, his psychic consciousness occupied with holding back demons and maintaining the Astronomicon. He couldn't issue orders, couldn't make policy, could barely communicate except through the most powerful psychers. And even then, his messages were cryptic, interpretable, subject to endless theological debate. So the Imperium invented government without a functioning executive, the Adeptus Terra, the priesthood of Earth. An interlocking network of organizations, each with its own sphere of authority, each theoretically answering to the Emperor, but practically operating with near total independence. At the top sat the High Lords of Terra, 12 individuals who collectively ruled the Imperium. Their positions varied slightly over the millennia. Some seats were permanent, others rotational, but the structure remained constant. The Master of the Administratum, who oversaw the vast bureaucratic machine that kept the Imperium functioning. Billions of scribes and adepts cataloging everything from planetary tithes to ship movements to population counts. The most powerful High Lord in practice, because information was power, and the Administratum controlled all information. The Tsun, Fabricator General of Mars, representing the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Treaty of Mars gave them permanent representation among the High Lords. They controlled all technology, all manufacturing, all innovation, or rather, all the careful, ritualized rediscovery that passed for innovation. The Ecclesiarchy, head of the Adeptus Ministorum, the Imperial Church, the organization that would transform the Emperor's atheist vision into the most powerful religion in galactic history. We'll come back to them. The inquisitorial representative, speaking for the Emperor's Holy Inquisition. The secret police, the thought police, the paranoia made institutional. They had authority that superseded nearly everyone, answerable only to the Emperor, which meant, in practice, answerable to no one. The Lord Commander Militant of the Astra Militarum, commanding the Imperial Guard. Billions of soldiers across millions of worlds. Normal humans who formed the backbone of the Imperial military, even if Space Marines got all the glory. The Paternoval Envoy, representing the Navis Nobilite. The Navigator Houses. Families of mutants born with third eyes that could see the warp, allowing them to guide ships through the immaterium. Without them, interstellar travel was impossible. They knew it. They charged accordingly. The Grand Master of Assassins, who didn't officially exist, but whose seat at the table ensured that political problems could be solved with extreme prejudice when necessary. And others. The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, when he chose to attend, though the Golden Guardians of the Palace rarely involved themselves in governance. The Lord Commander of Segmentum Solar, representatives of various imperial institutions. These 12 individuals governed an empire of 1,000,000 worlds. They made decisions by consensus, by politicking, by competing spheres of influence. There was no single ruler, no clear hierarchy beyond the Emperor himself, who couldn't actually rule. It was government by committee, slow, inefficient, prone to internal conflict and competing agendas. But it was also resilient. No single High Lord could stage a coup. No one figure could dominate the others. The system prevented consolidation of power through sheer bureaucratic inertia. Below the High Lords sat layers upon layers of administration. The administratum alone employed quadrillions of scribes, adepts, clerks, data collectors, analysts, auditors, and bureaucrats. Most of them had no idea what the information they processed actually meant. They simply followed procedures, filled out forms, maintained records. A clerk on Terra might spend his entire life processing resource allocation requests from a subsector he couldn't locate on a map. Another might catalog ship movements without understanding navigation or void warfare. A third might transcribe legal precedents from one format to another, maintaining archives that no one would ever read, but everyone agreed were essential. This was government in the age of the Imperium. Vast, impersonal, grinding forward through accumulated procedure rather than actual decision-making. It worked not because it was good, but because it was too big and too slow to fail catastrophically. Individual worlds could be lost. Entire sectors could descend into chaos. But the bureaucracy continued. Recording, cataloging, taxing, maintaining the fiction that someone, somewhere, knew what was happening and had a plan. They didn't, of course. No one had a plan. The Imperium ran on accumulated precedent and the desperate prayer that tomorrow would be survivable enough that you could face the day after tomorrow. But it ran. For 10,000 years, it ran. The Emperor had been very clear. There are no gods. Religion is superstition. Faith is a crutch that prevents rational thought. The imperial truth would guide humanity forward through science and reason. He'd been sitting on the golden throne for less than a century when his worshippers founded a church in his name. It began organically, naturally. People saw a being of infinite power, seemingly immortal, who sacrificed himself to save humanity. A father figure who'd united the species and given them purpose, who sat eternally vigilant, holding back demons, lighting the way through the darkness. How was that not a god? The imperial cult started small. Local practices, prayers offered to the emperor for protection, shrines built on battlefields where his space marines had won victories. Gradually, these practices spread, formalized, became organized. By M32, there were competing churches, different interpretations of the emperor's divinity. Some said he'd always been a god, others that he achieved godhood through sacrifice. Some worshipped him as the Omniscia, merging with the Mechanicus's machine god. Others saw him as a warrior deity, a war god who demanded blood in his service. The Adeptus Ministorum emerged from this chaos, the official state church, the unified doctrine that would eventually dominate all others. It absorbed some competing faiths, destroyed others, and gradually positioned itself as the sole legitimate interpreter of the emperor's will. The irony was bitter. The emperor who'd rejected godhood was being worshipped as the god-emperor of mankind. The imperial truth, which had tried to deny the power of faith, was dead. Killed by the very beings, his own subjects, it was supposed to enlighten. But the Ecclesiarchy wasn't wrong in a universe where the warp existed. Faith had power. Literal, measurable power. Belief shaped reality in the immaterium. Acts of devotion created ripples that the chaos gods noticed and occasionally were disturbed by. Saints manifested. Living saints, they were called. Individuals whose faith burned so brightly that they could perform miracles, survive wounds that should kill them, inspire armies to victory against impossible odds, shine with literal holy light that banished demons. Were they psychers whose powers were channeled through religious fervor? Were they manifestations of the emperor's will, projected from the golden throne? Were they warp phenomena, demons of order rather than chaos, created by humanity's collective faith? No one knew, but they were real, and their existence seemed to validate the Ecclesiarchy's claims. By M36, the Ecclesiarchy was one of the most powerful institutions in the Imperium. By M41, it was arguably more powerful than any other organization except possibly the Inquisition. It controlled entire worlds, commanded armies. The Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, were its militant arm. Women trained to fight with the same devotion that Space Marines brought to warfare, but powered by faith rather than genetic engineering. Every imperial citizen was raised in the cult. From childhood, They learned the catechisms of hate, the litanies of fury, the prayers that accompanied every action. Work became worship. Suffering became sacrament. Death in the Emperor's service became the highest calling a human could achieve. The Ecclesiarchy taught that life was toil, that suffering was penance for humanity's sins, that the only hope lay in absolute devotion to the Emperor and absolute obedience to his appointed representatives, conveniently the Ecclesiarchy itself. It was totalitarian, oppressive. It turned human beings into cogs in a machine powered by faith. But it also kept them sane in an insane universe, gave them meaning when meaninglessness would have led to despair, and despair to chaos. The imperial cult was lies, but they were useful lies. Necessary lies. The kind of lies that keep people fighting when rational analysis would tell them to give up. The kind of lies that turn ordinary humans into weapons capable of facing demons and aliens without breaking. The Emperor, trapped on his throne, unable to speak clearly, must have seen what his empire had become. The theocratic nightmare built on foundations he'd tried to prevent. The worship he'd explicitly rejected. Did it hurt him? Did he rage against it in whatever consciousness remained? Or had he, after millennia of holding back the warp, come to understand that faith was the only weapon humanity had? That lies which kept people alive were better than truths that led to extinction? We'll never know. The Emperor keeps his counsel, and 10,000 years is a long time to reconsider your principles. Every day, the black ships arrive at Terra. Massive vessels painted in midnight colors, their holds filled with human cargo. Psychers, collected from across the Imperium by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Some are children who manifested powers they couldn't control. Others are adults who hid their gifts for years before being discovered. All of them taken from their homes, their families, their lives. Some of these psychers are trained, taught to control their abilities. Become sanctioned psychers, their foreheads marked. With the Aquila, their powers bound by rituals and psychic conditioning. They serve the Imperium as astropaths, communicating across vast distances. As battle psychers, wielding the warp as a weapon, as advisors to generals and governors. But not all psychers are strong enough to be trained. Not all are stable enough to be trusted, and the Astronomicon requires fuel. The Emperor cannot maintain it alone. His psychic power, vast as it is, needs supplementation. So the psychers who cannot serve in other ways serve in this final manner. They are brought before the Golden Throne, led into chambers where the light of the Astronomicon burns brightest, and there, through processes that are part ritual and part psychic machinery, their life force is extracted. Their souls are fed into the great engine that keeps the beacon burning. The death is not quick. The process takes hours, sometimes days. The psycher's consciousness remains aware as their essence is drawn out. They feel themselves being consumed, burned away, used as fuel. The exact number varies. 1,000 souls per day, some sources say. 10,000, others claim. The Imperium keeps these numbers deliberately vague, even from itself. Precision would make the horror too specific, too real. Better to speak in generalities, to say the necessary sacrifice rather than count the cost in individual lives. Over 10,000 years, the math is staggering. 365 million souls, if we assume 1,000 per day. 3 billion, if the higher estimates are correct. All of them burned to keep a single light shining. All of them dying so that ships can navigate, so that the Imperium can remain unified, so that humanity doesn't fragment into a million isolated worlds, drowning in darkness. Is it worth it? That's not a question the Imperium allows itself to ask. The alternative, isolation, fragmentation, the collapse of interstellar travel, is assumed to be worse. Has to be worse. Because if it's not, then the daily sacrifice is simply murder on an industrial scale. And that's not something the Imperium's collective conscience can bear to contemplate. So the black ships continue their rounds. The Scholastica Psychana continues training those who can be trained. And the Golden Throne continues consuming souls like an engine that will never be satisfied, never be full, never be enough. The Emperor protects. But the price of protection is 10,000 screaming souls per day. 10 million per year. Uncountable billions across the millennia. That's the real foundation of the Imperium. Not glory, not honor, not even faith. Just an endless stream of human beings fed into a machine that keeps everyone else alive a little longer. The light guides us home, but the light runs on fuel that screams. While the Ecclesiarchy claimed the Emperor's divinity, the Adeptus Mechanicus maintained their independence through the Treaty of Mars. They worshipped the machine god and his prophet, the Omnissiah, who was definitely, totally, absolutely the Emperor, just viewed through a theological lens that let them maintain doctrinal distinction. The Mechanicus controlled all technology in the Imperium. Every forge world, every manufactorum, every shipyard. If you wanted weapons, armor, ships, or anything more complex than a farming implement, you dealt with the Mechanicus, and you dealt on their terms. They'd evolved from the cult Mechanicus of Old Night, the religion that wasn't quite religion, that had kept Mars functioning when understanding failed. By M32, they'd formalized their beliefs into something approaching systematic theology. The machine god was the divine force present in all technology. The Omnissiah was his prophet, the Emperor, who'd revealed sacred knowledge during the Great Crusade. The motive force was the animating principle that gave machines their spirits. The quest for knowledge was holy. The STC was scripture. And the machine spirits that dwelt in complex technology were literal, though whether they were AI remnants, warp phenomena, or simple metaphor depended on who you asked and when. Tech priests replaced flesh with machine as they advanced in the priesthood. An initiate might have a few augmetic fingers. A magos would have entire limbs replaced. An archmagos might be more machine than flesh, their organic components reduced to a brain in a mechanical shell, and even that supplemented with cogitators and neural implants. They spoke in binary cant. Their voices were mechanical, their movements precise. They'd made themselves into what they worshipped. Proof of faith, written in steel and circuitry. Innovation was the greatest heresy. The STC had provided all knowledge. The ancients had achieved perfection. To suggest improvement was to suggest the Omnissiah's gifts were inadequate. Worse, innovation risked creating something that might be corrupted, might develop machine spirits that were unstable or hostile. So instead of innovation, the Mechanicus practiced discovery, finding lost STC patterns, recovering ancient technology, rediscovering knowledge that had been known before. It was a fiction, of course. Sometimes they did innovate. Sometimes necessity demanded new designs, but it was always framed as recovery, as reclamation, never as creation. This made technological progress glacial. A new weapon design might take centuries to be approved, tested, ritually blessed, integrated into production patterns. By the time it saw widespread deployment, it might be obsolete for the conditions that had prompted its development. But it also made the Mechanicus indispensable. They were the only ones who understood technology, the only ones who could maintain the ancient machines that kept the Imperium running, the only ones who could build new ships, new weapons, new infrastructure. Every Forge world was essentially independent, ruled by a fabricator locum who answered to the fabricator general on Mars, but in Sunshine. Practice did whatever they wanted as long as tithes were paid. Some Forge worlds specialized. Metallica built Titans. Graia manufactured laser guns. Ryza produced plasma weapons, their quality control slightly better than the standard 1 in 10 will explode average. Skitarii legions served as the Mechanicus's military arm. Augmented warriors, their bodies modified for war. They fought with precision that made them nearly as effective as Space Marines, though without the individual initiative or adaptability. They were weapons, tools, and they were treated as such. The Mechanicus's greatest assets were the Titans, god machines, cathedral-sized war engines that could level cities, each one a relic from the dark age of technology, maintained through millennia, housing machine spirits so old and powerful they bordered on independent consciousness. Piloting a Titan required melding with its machine spirit. The princeps, the pilot, linked their nervous system directly to the war engine, felt what it felt, thought what it thought. Over time, the boundary between human and machine blurred. Veteran princeps spoke of their Titans as extensions of themselves, or themselves as extensions of their Titans. The distinction ceased to matter. The Mechanicus kept secrets, knowledge that couldn't be shared, technology too dangerous for common use. They had vaults on Mars that hadn't been opened in millennia. Sealed sections of forge worlds where experiments too heretical or too dangerous were conducted behind wards and prayers. And they searched. Constantly. Explorator fleets roamed the galaxy, seeking lost STC fragments, ancient ruins, Xenos technology that could be studied, reverse engineered, incorporated, always carefully, always ritually, always with extensive testing to ensure no corruption. Because the Mechanicus remembered the men of iron, remembered when machines turned on humanity. They would never allow that to happen again. Their paranoia about artificial intelligence was absolute. A simple auto-targeting system was acceptable. A cogitator that could analyze data was permitted. But anything approaching true decision-making intelligence was abominable intelligence and had to be destroyed. Servitors were the compromise. Lobotomized humans with machine parts bolted on. Just enough organic brain to allow complex tasks, but not enough to constitute actual consciousness. They were everywhere in the Imperium, performing labor that was too complex for pure machines, but too dangerous or tedious for valuable human workers. Creating a servitor required a human body. Sometimes criminals were sentenced to servitorization. Sometimes the poor sold themselves or their family members. Sometimes people just disappeared, and no one asked where the new batch of servitors came from. It was slavery, but it was slavery performed on things that were no longer quite human, so the Imperium's conscience remained unburdened. The Mechanicus made the Imperium possible. Without them, the ships wouldn't fly, the weapons wouldn't fire. The infrastructure would collapse. They knew this. Everyone knew this. So they maintained their independence, their secrets, their deviation from imperial doctrine. And the Imperium let them. Because needing them was better than losing them. The Imperium barely had time to recover from the heresy before the next existential threat emerged. Early M32, approximately 1,000 years after Horus's death. Humanity was still rebuilding. The legions had been broken into chapters. The bureaucracy was solidifying, the Ecclesiarchy was rising, and from the galactic west, an Ork Wars of unprecedented scale descended on Imperial space. This wasn't normal orcs. These were different, larger, smarter, organized in ways orcs hadn't been since the War of the Beast. They called their leader the Beast, and he was enormous. Primarch-sized, some reports said, capable of strategy that made Imperial generals look like amateurs. The orcs attacked Ulanor, the world where Horus had been named War Master. Symbolic, perhaps, or just tactical opportunity. Either way, they conquered it, turned it into an attack moon, a planetoid hollowed out, fitted with engines, covered in weapons. Mobile fortress capable of appearing in a system's orbit without warning. Then they did something unprecedented. They sent ambassadors to Terra. Actual diplomatic envoys. Orcs, speaking Gothic. demanding humanity's surrender. The High Lords killed the ambassadors immediately, of course, but the message was clear. These weren't savage raiders. They were an empire, and they intended to conquer. The war consumed the Imperium for decades. Attack moons appeared over Forge worlds, capital worlds, strategic targets. Each one had to be destroyed through boarding actions that cost thousands of lives. Space Marine chapters threw themselves into the fighting. Some were destroyed entirely. The Imperial Fist's fortress monastery was attacked, breached. The chapter master killed. 6 chapters deployed to Ullanor to kill the beast in his throne room. They succeeded. But the beast they killed wasn't the original beast. It was one of several prime orcs, all of them massive, all capable of leading. Kill one, another takes over. The Wah continued. Eventually, through desperate measures and catastrophic losses, the Imperium won. Ullanor was destroyed. The attack moons eliminated. The Ork Empire broken. But the cost was staggering. The Imperium that emerged from the War of the Beast was diminished, cautious, more paranoid. The Space Marines had proven they could be overwhelmed. Terra itself had been threatened. The comforting certainty that the heresy was the worst that could happen was shattered. The War of the Beast taught the Imperium a lesson it would carry forward into M42. There was no victory, only survival. Only the brief breathing space between one crisis and the next. 2,000 years after the heresy, Basan, Imperium was vast, sprawling, difficult to govern from Terra. Communication across the galaxy took months or years. Orders from the High Lords might arrive decades after the situations they addressed had changed completely. Segmentum Pacificus, one of the 5 major divisions of Imperial space, decided it had had enough. The Administratum had made a mistake. Taxes levied incorrectly. Resources allocated to the wrong sectors. The kind of bureaucratic error that happens constantly in any organization that spans 1,000,000 worlds. But this error was significant enough that entire subsectors faced famine. The governor of the subsector appealed to Terra, waited for response, waited longer. Eventually, after years of silence while populations died, he made a decision. He would handle it locally, reallocate resources from neighboring systems, fix the problem without waiting for permission from Terra. It worked. The famine was averted, but the governor had violated protocol, had acted without authorization from the High Lords. When Terra finally responded, 3 years after his initial request, it was with an inquisitorial investigation for independence and possible heresy. The governor refused to submit. Other worlds in Segmentum Pacificus supported him. They had the same complaints, the same frustrations with a government that was literally light years away from their problems. They declared independence, not rebellion, not secession. They still worshipped the emperor. still considered themselves imperial. But they would govern themselves, make their own decisions. Terra could remain the spiritual capital, but Segmentum Pacificus would handle its own affairs. They even elected their own emperor, called him the Council, established Nova Terra as their new capital. For 900 years, the Imperium was split. Terra controlled Segmentum's Solar, Obscurus, Ultima, and Tempestus. Nova Terra controlled Pacificus. They didn't war with each other. Both sides were too pragmatic for that. They simply coexisted. Two Imperiums, both imperial, both claiming legitimacy. Terra couldn't reclaim Pacificus through force. They were engaged in too many wars on other fronts. The Space Marine chapters were divided. Some sided with Terra, others with Nova Terra. Military conquest was impossible. Eventually, diplomacy succeeded where force couldn't. The Council died without an heir strong enough to maintain the independent government. Factions within Nova Terra began arguing about succession, about who had the right to rule. Terra offered reunification. No punishment for the secession. No retribution. Just come back. Be imperial again. After centuries of negotiations, it happened. Segmentum Pacificus was reintegrated. The Imperium was whole again. But the lesson was clear. The Imperium was too big to govern effectively. Terra's authority was theoretical in regions where communication took years. Local governments had to act independently whether they wanted to or not. The solution was to acknowledge this. Grant more autonomy to sector and subsector governments. Allow local decision-making as long as tithes were paid and worship continued. The Imperium became less a unified state and more a feudal confederation bound by faith and mutual defense. It was messy, inefficient, but it worked. And in the Imperium, working was all that mattered. M36, 36th Millennium. The Ecclesiarchy had been growing in power for 3,000 years. What had started as grassroots worship of the Emperor had become a bureaucratic behemoth controlling entire sectors. The Adeptus Ministorum rivaled the Administratum in influence, and then a man named Goga Vandire became both Master of the Administratum and Ecclesiarch simultaneously. Two of the High Lord positions, held by one person. It violated every principle of separation that had kept the Imperium stable. Vandire was charismatic, brilliant, utterly ruthless, and completely insane. He declared himself the Emperor's voice on Terra, the living representative of the God Emperor's will. He used the Ecclesiarchy's vast resources to fund his own ambitions, created the Frateris Templars, an army of fanatics loyal to him personally rather than the Imperium. He purged his enemies, declared entire chapters of Space Marines traitor on the flimsiest evidence, sent inquisitors who questioned him to penal worlds, taxed forge worlds into rebellion, then crushed them with overwhelming force as examples. The Age of Apostasy, they called it. The Reign of Blood. Vandire's rule lasted for a century. 100 years of a mad tyrant using the Imperium's faith as his personal weapon. Space Marine chapters refused his orders, some openly. The Adeptus Custodes, who hadn't left the Imperial Palace in millennia, began preparing to intervene. The Mechanicus declared independence from Terran authority until the situation was resolved. The end came from an unexpected quarter. Vandire had created an order of female warriors, the daughters of the Emperor, his personal bodyguards, raised from childhood to worship him as the Emperor's prophet, to die for him without question. A custodes named Constantine Valdor, or someone claiming to be him, the records are unclear, brought the daughter's leader, Alicia Dominica, into the Golden Throne Room. Let her stand in the Emperor's presence. Let her hear whatever message the Emperor could still communicate. She emerged changed, horrified. She'd believed Vandire was the Emperor's voice. The Emperor himself had shown her otherwise, shown her what Vandire truly was. Dominica and her daughters executed Vandire, cut off his head in his own throne room. The reign of blood ended. But the damage was done. A century of misrule had destabilized entire sectors. Wars had been started on false pretenses. Loyal servants had been executed for imagined heresies. The Imperium's internal machinery had been twisted to serve one man's madness. The reforms that followed were comprehensive. The decree passive forbade the Ecclesiarchy from maintaining men under arms. They could have no armies, no military force. The Frateris Templars were disbanded. But the daughters of the Emperor remained, renamed the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. They weren't men, they were women under arms, which technically didn't violate the decree. A legal fiction that everyone pretended was meaningful. The sisters became the Ecclesiarchy's military wing. Orders militant, each one dedicated to a different aspect of faith. The Order of Our Martyred Lady, the Order of the Bloody Rose, the Order of the Valorous Heart. 6 major orders, dozens of minor ones, all of them warriors whose faith was their armor and their fury was their weapon. They fought like space marines, but died like humans. Their power armor wasn't as advanced. Their bodies weren't genetically enhanced. But their devotion was absolute. A sister of battle would charge into certain death if it served the Emperor, would burn heretics with flamer and bolter while singing hymns, would die with prayers on their lips and faith in their hearts. Living saints emerged most often from their ranks. Women whose faith burned so bright it could turn aside bullets, whose prayers could heal wounds, whose very presence inspired armies to impossible victories. Whether they were psychers channeling power through religious fervor, or warp manifestations given form by collective belief, or actual miracles from the Emperor himself? No one knew. But they were real and terrifying. The age of apostasy taught the Imperium another lesson. No single individual could be trusted with too much power. The High Lords would remain divided, competing, checking each other through institutional rivalry rather than formal oversight. It was inefficient. It led to paralysis, to decisions being made by committee, to opportunities lost because 12 people couldn't agree on a course of action. But it was safer than giving one person the keys to the entire Imperium. Vandire had proven what happened when safeguards failed. The Imperium would rather be inefficient than risk another reign of blood. As if the age of apostasy wasn't enough, M36 brought other horrors. The Plague of Unbelief swept through entire sectors. Not a literal plague, though there were those too. This was spiritual contagion. Doubt, loss of faith, the rejection of the imperial cult. It started on worlds where Vandire's misrule had been most keenly felt, where populations had been taxed to starvation, conscripted into pointless wars, seen their leaders executed for questioning authority. These worlds asked, if this is what faith brings, why believe? The question was heresy, but it was a heresy that made sense, that resonated with people's lived experience, and it spread. Entire worlds renounced the imperial cult, not to worship chaos, that would come later, as chaos always finds cracks to exploit, but simply to reject the system that had failed them. They still considered themselves human, still wanted to be part of the broader Imperium. They just didn't want to worship the Emperor anymore. The Imperium's response was uncompromising. Faith was mandatory. Worship was not optional. These worlds would comply, or they would burn. The Space Marines deployed. The Sisters of Battle, newly reorganized after Vandire's fall, threw themselves into the fighting with desperate fervor. They needed to prove their loyalty after serving Vandire. Needed to demonstrate that faith, properly applied, was humanity's strength rather than its weakness. The wars lasted decades. World after world reduced to ash. Populations exterminated. In some cases, entire planetary surfaces were sterilized through orbital bombardment rather than risk the doubt spreading. It was genocidal, monstrous. Millions, perhaps billions, died because they'd lost faith in a god who'd never claimed to be a god. But from the Imperium's perspective, it was necessary. Because the alternative was allowing doubt to fester. And doubt, in a universe where chaos feeds on emotion, where demons can manifest through cracks in belief, is a weapon as dangerous as any bolter. The Plague of Unbelief was crushed. The surviving populations were re-educated. Forcibly, painfully, they learned to worship, or they learned to pretend convincingly enough that the difference no longer mattered. M36 ended with the Imperium bloodied but intact. The age of apostasy had passed. The reforms had been implemented. The faith had been preserved through force of arms and the execution of millions. It was survival. But the cost of survival kept rising, and no one knew how much higher it could go before the weight became unbearable. Jump forward 5,000 years. M41. Early in the millennium that would culminate in the galaxy splitting in half. A man named Macharian emerged. A Lord Commander, militant of exceptional brilliance, strategic genius, charismatic leader. Some whispered he was the Emperor reborn. Others said he was what the Primarchs should have been. He launched a crusade. The Macharian Crusade. 7 years of continuous conquest that reclaimed 1,000 worlds. His armies swept through sectors that had been lost during Old Night and never properly recovered. He brought them back into imperial control through a combination of military genius and diplomatic skill. Macharian fought alongside his troops. Led from the front, inspired fanatical loyalty. The Astra Militarum regiments that served under him would follow him into hell itself. Many did. In 7 years, he achieved what most commanders couldn't in a lifetime. Extended the Imperium's borders further than they'd reached since the Great Crusade itself. He was 50 years old, at the height of his power, planning his next conquests. And then he died. Disease, natural causes, the mortal weakness that even genius couldn't overcome. His empire collapsed within months. The commanders he'd left in charge of conquered worlds started fighting among themselves. The newly reclaimed systems, held together by Macharian's personal authority, fragmented. Warlords emerged. Rebellions erupted. Chaos cults that had been suppressed found new opportunities. The Macharian heresy followed the Macharian Crusade. Centuries of warfare to reclaim what had just been conquered. To put down the very commanders Macharian had trusted. To purge the corruption that had grown in his absence. By the time the heresy ended, most of what Macharian had won was lost again. Some worlds remained imperial. Others fell back into isolation. Still others were so devastated by the fighting that they could barely support human life. Macharian's lesson was the same as the Primarchs. Individual brilliance could achieve miracles, but miracles couldn't be sustained, couldn't be inherited. When the hero died, the structure built on their personal authority collapsed. The Imperium learned not to trust heroes, not to rely on individual genius. Better the grinding, impersonal bureaucracy that continued regardless of who led it. Better mediocre leadership that was replaceable than exceptional leadership that couldn't be duplicated. Macharian was remembered, venerated. His name became a prayer. His strategies were studied in military academies, but the Imperium made sure never to create another Macharian. Never to give one person enough power that their death could trigger another collapse. The slow, inefficient, collective leadership of the High Lords was safer, even if it meant never achieving what Macarius had achieved, even if it meant accepting that the Imperium would never expand, only contract, only survive. Some wars define sectors, some define eras. The 3 Armageddon Wars defined what it meant to fight for the Imperium in the late 41st millennium. Armageddon, a hive world, massively industrialized, strategically vital. Its manufactorums produced weapons and equipment for entire sectors. Lose Armageddon, and you lose the industrial base that keeps nearby systems defended. The first war for Armageddon came when Angron returned, the demon primarch of the World Eaters, ascended to immortality through Khorne's blessing, led a massive incursion from the warp. His demon legions and corrupted space marines descended on Armageddon with the intent to drown the world in blood. The Imperium responded with everything. Space marines from a dozen chapters, hundreds of Imperial Guard regiments, Titans, the Grey Knights, the demon-hunting chapter that specialized in fighting warp entities. The fighting was apocalyptic. Entire hive cities were lost. Billions died. Angron manifested physically, a being of rage and brass and eternal fury, towering over battlefields and killing hundreds with each sweep of his demon weapons. The Grey Knights confronted him directly. 100 of them, the entire First Brotherhood, led by their chapter master. They fought Angron and his bloodthirster bodyguards in combat that bent reality around its violence. The Grey Knights won. Barely. They banished Angron back to the warp. 13 Grey Knights survived. 87 died. But Armageddon was saved. Then came the problem of witnesses. The Grey Knight's existence was supposed to be secret. The Inquisition didn't want common soldiers knowing about demon primarchs or the specialized anti-diamond space marines. Knowledge of chaos was itself corrupting. Better that people didn't know what they'd fought. So the Inquisition executed the survivors. All of them. Every Imperial Guard regiment that had fought on Armageddon. Millions of soldiers who defended their world with valor and courage, killed to preserve secrecy, to prevent the spread of corruption. The Space Marine chapters who'd fought alongside them were furious. The Space Wolves nearly went to war with the Inquisition over it. Only a direct intervention by higher authorities prevented open conflict between Imperial forces. It was justified as necessary. Cruel, but pragmatic. The kind of decision that keeps the Imperium functioning. And it poisoned trust between the Astra Militarum and the Inquisition for generations. The Second War for Armageddon came decades later. Orks. A massive Wag, led by Gazg Kul Mag Uruk Thraka, a prophet of Gork and Mork, who'd united dozens of Ork tribes. He attacked Armageddon with billions of greenskins, seeking conquest and a really good fight. The war lasted for years. The orcs were endless. For every one killed, 2 more seemed to appear. They loved it. This was what orcs lived for. A proper scrap. A fight that went on forever. Commissar Yarrick became the hero of the Second War, an old man with an augmetic eye and an iron will. He held Hades' hive against impossible odds, inspired defenders who should have broken, became such a legend that the orcs themselves respected him. Gazg-Kul wanted to fight him personally, considered him a worthy opponent. The Imperium won. Eventually. Gazg-Kul was driven off Armageddon, but he wasn't defeated, wasn't killed. He retreated to rebuild his forces, promising to return. The Third War for Armageddon came in 998. Gazg-Kul made good on his promise. He returned with an even larger Wag, the biggest orc invasion in millennia. His fleet was so vast it blotted out stars. This time, the entire sector mobilized. Space Marines from dozens of chapters. The entire strategic reserve of Imperial Guard regiments. Titans by the dozen. Every resource the Imperium could spare without leaving other systems defenseless. The fighting is still ongoing in M42. Decades of continuous warfare. Trenches that have been held by the same units for years. Cities reduced to rubble and fought over meter by meter. Orcs who've been on Armageddon so long they're starting to think of it as home. Yarrick hunts Gazg-Kul. Gazg-Kul hunts Yarrick. Both are ancient now. Both are legends. Their personal vendetta has become myth. The old man and the war boss. The hero and the monster. Locked in eternal combat on a world that's become a monument to war itself. Armageddon will never be clean again. Will never be peaceful. Even if the orcs are driven off, the world is scarred, poisoned, reduced to a fortress that exists only to be fought over. But it stands, still imperial, still producing weapons, still defiant. That's victory in M41. Not triumph, just survival, just the refusal to fall. M41 brought something new to the galaxy, something that made even the Imperium's endless paranoia seem inadequate. The Tyranids. The first tyrannic war started when Hive Fleet Behemoth entered the galaxy from the galactic east. A fleet of bioships, living vessels that traveled through the void and consumed everything in their path. The Imperium had never seen anything like them. They weren't raiders seeking loot, weren't conquerors seeking territory. They were exterminators, consuming biomass, stripping worlds down to bedrock, leaving nothing but dead rock behind. Behemoth swept through the eastern fringe. World after world fell, populations devoured, ecosystems destroyed. The Tyranids left no survivors, no structures, just emptiness. The Ultramarines, chapter, made their stand at Macragge, their home world. The entire chapter mobilized. Their successor chapters came to help. They fought the Tyranids in space and on the ground, lost tens of thousands of space marines. But they won. Barely. The Hive fleet was destroyed. Macragge survived. Though its polar fortresses were shattered and its population devastated. The Second Tyrannic War came with Hive fleet Kraken. Larger, smarter. It had learned from Behemoth's defeat. Kraken split into multiple smaller fleets, attacking different systems simultaneously. The Imperium couldn't concentrate its forces, had to fight dozens of battles across hundreds of light years. The war lasted for years, consumed entire sectors. And even when Kraken was defeated, broken rather than destroyed, fragments remained. Splinter fleets that continued hunting, continued consuming. The Third Tyrannic War was Hive Fleet Leviathan, the largest yet, approaching from below the galactic plane, too massive to stop, too numerous to count. It's still ongoing in M42, still consuming, still growing. And worse, the Imperium knows these are just scout fleets, vanguards. The main body of the Tyranid swarm, the massive concentration of biomass that these Hive fleets are reporting back to, is still outside the galaxy. Waiting, growing, preparing. The Silent King, the Necron ruler who'd gone into exile after the war in heaven, returned to the galaxy. He'd traveled beyond the galactic rim, seen what was coming. The Tyranids weren't just a threat to the Imperium. They were a threat to all life. To the Necron's hope of one day reclaiming flesh. He tried to warn the Imperium. They didn't listen, or couldn't. The bureaucracy that governed the Imperium couldn't process warnings from Xenos, even when those warnings might save them. The Tyranids represent something philosophically horrifying. They're not evil, not corrupt, not serving chaos. They're just hungry. Evolution itself, weaponized and scaled up to galactic proportions. You can't negotiate with them, can't corrupt them, can't turn them. You can only kill them. And every Tyranid you kill makes the hive mind smarter, teaches it, allows it to adapt. They're learning, evolving, getting better at killing the Imperium soldiers, better at cracking Imperial fortifications, better at fighting space marines, and there's an entire galaxy's worth of them still coming. We've talked about wars and institutions. Now let's talk about people. The trillions of ordinary humans who live and die without ever seeing a space marine or firing a laser gun in anger. Life in the Imperium varies wildly depending on where you live. A citizen on a civilized world might have a relatively comfortable existence, indoor plumbing, education, a job that doesn't kill you before 30. They're the lucky ones, the minority. Most Imperial citizens live in hive cities, massive arcologies that stretch kilometers into the sky and equally deep into the ground. Populations of billions pressed into spaces that were designed for millions. Every surface covered with habitation blocks, manufactorums, temples, and the endless infrastructure that keeps the city alive. In the upper hives, you might see daylight, might breathe air that wasn't recycled 1,000 times. The wealthy live here. Merchants, nobles, administrators, anyone whose position grants them privilege. The middle hives are where most people exist. Working in factories, living in apartment blocks where families share single rooms, eating corpse starch, recycled protein from the dead, processed and flavored to be almost palatable. Going to work, coming home. Worshipping the emperor on their designated holy days. Raising children who will inherit the same life. The lower hives are hell, so far below ground that there's no natural light, no clean air. Pollution so thick you can taste it. The machinery down here, water treatment, power generation, waste disposal, is ancient, barely maintained, failing slowly across generations. People in the underhive live in darkness, drink water that's barely filtered, breathe air that will give you cancer by 40 if violence doesn't kill you first. There's no law down there except what gangs enforce. The Adeptus Arbites, the Imperial Police, don't venture into the deepest levels. It's not worth the risk for populations that contribute little to the tithes. You're born in the underhive. You die in the underhive. If you're lucky, you die quickly. Violence, industrial accident, disease. If you're unlucky, you live long enough to see your children face the same fate. To understand that nothing will ever improve, that this is all there is forever. Every hive has a church, many churches, temples to the emperor ranging from simple shrines to cathedrals that span entire levels. Worship is mandatory. Missing service without excuse can result in punishment. Repeated absence can be interpreted as heresy. The sermons are about duty, suffering, the necessity of sacrifice. You're told that your pain serves the emperor, that your miserable life is part of his plan, that enduring without complaint is the highest form of worship. Death in his service will bring you to his side in the afterlife, a heaven that's never actually described in detail, but must be better than this. It's propaganda. Obvious propaganda. But it's also all people have. Take away the faith, and what's left? The realization that your suffering is pointless, that the system grinding you down doesn't even notice you exist, that you were born a tool and will die a tool, and nothing you do matters. Better to believe the lies. Better to have faith that means something. Better to die convinced your pain served a purpose than to die knowing it was all meaningless. Agri-worlds are different. Entire planets given over to food production. Vast fields stretching to the horizon. Automated harvesters the size of buildings. Most of the population works agriculture. Planting, tending, harvesting. endless cycles tied to growing seasons. Life is still hard, still short, but there's sky above you, fresh air, space to move. It's not freedom. You're still tithed, still monitored, still subject to the Imperium's demands, but it's less oppressive than the hives. Forge worlds are their own nightmare, ruled by the Mechanicus. Every surface covered in factories and foundries. The air thick with pollutants. The population modified. Augmetic eyes to see in darkness. Respirators to breathe the toxic atmosphere. Mechanical limbs to work the massive machinery. Tech priests see Forge world populations as resources, components in the great machine of production. You're given enough to survive, enough to work, enough to breed the next generation of workers. Beyond that, your comfort is irrelevant. Death worlds are planets so hostile that survival itself is a full-time occupation. Jungle worlds, where every plant is poisonous. Ice worlds where temperatures kill unprotected humans in minutes. These worlds produce the best Imperial Guard regiments. Because if you can survive your home world, you can survive anything the galaxy throws at you. The people there are proud, tough. They take recruits from other worlds and call them soft. Their casualty rates are lower because they understand viscerally what veterans from civilized worlds have to learn. Hesitate, and you die. And then there are the Schola Progenium, orphanages for the children of Imperial heroes. If your parent died in Imperial service, guard officer killed in action, adept murdered by heretics, anyone whose death served the throne, your children are taken to the Schola. They're raised in institutions designed to create loyal servants of the Emperor, taught warfare, tactics, faith, and absolute obedience. The commissars come from the Schola, the stormtroopers, many inquisitors, anyone whose loyalty must be beyond question, whose dedication to the Imperium must be absolute. It's not kindness. The children aren't being cared for out of compassion. They're being molded into tools. But it's a life with purpose, with meaning beyond survival. Many Schola graduates die young in service to the Emperor, but they die believing they mattered. That's more than most Imperial citizens ever get. If Space Marines are the Imperium's scalpel, the Imperial Guard is its hammer. Billions of soldiers, conscripted from across 1,000,000 worlds, thrown at the Imperium's enemies in waves that seem endless because they essentially are. Every world pays tithes, resources, manufactured goods, and manpower. The best soldiers are taken for the Guard, given basic training, equipped with flak armor and laser guns, loaded onto troop transports and sent to war zones across the galaxy. You don't serve in the Guard on your home world. You're shipped somewhere else, somewhere you've never heard of, to fight enemies you don't understand. Alongside soldiers from dozens of other worlds who speak different languages and worship the Emperor through different traditions. This is deliberate. The Guard doesn't want soldiers who are defending their homes. They want soldiers who'll obey orders regardless of what those orders are, who'll burn a world without questioning whether the civilians there deserve it, who'll execute heretics without wondering if there's been a mistake. Distance creates obedience. If you're from a jungle world, you won't hesitate to purge a hive city. If you're from a civilized world, you won't question orders to raise agricultural settlements. You have no connection to these places. No reason to care. You follow orders, or you're executed for cowardice. The guard structure is regimental. Each world provides complete regiments, infantry, armored, artillery, whatever their specialty is. Cadia produced the finest infantry. Before it fell, every Cadian child could field strip a lasgun before they could read. Katakan produced jungle fighters who could survive anywhere. Mordian produced parade ground perfect soldiers who held the line no matter what. Talarn produced desert raiders. Valhalla produced ice warriors. Krieg produced something else entirely. The Death Corps of Krieg deserve special mention. Their world committed heresy during the heresy, siding with the traitors. When the Loyalists retook it, the Civil War turned nuclear. The planet became an irradiated wasteland. The survivors, racked with guilt over their world's betrayal, swore eternal penance. Kriegers are born in vitae wombs, gestated artificially to maintain population despite the radiation, raised in institutions that teach them they're already dead, that their lives are forfeit, that only through dying in the Emperor's service can they atone for their world's sin. They wear masks and greatcoats that hide their faces, speak rarely, advance into certain death without hesitation. If ordered to assault a fortification that will kill 90% of them, they do it. If they survive, they seem almost disappointed. Death is their goal. Service unto death their redemption. Other regiments find them unsettling. They don't break, don't rout. But they also don't seem human. They're already ghosts, just waiting for their bodies to catch up. Commissars maintain discipline. Political officers attached to regiments to ensure loyalty. They have absolute authority. Can execute soldiers for cowardice, hesitation, questioning orders, or simply not fighting hard enough. They shoot deserters. They shoot soldiers who retreat without authorization. They shoot anyone whose loyalty seems questionable. It's brutal, but it works. Guardsmen fear the enemy, but they fear the commissar more. Fear keeps them in line, keeps them fighting when rational people would flee, turns human beings into weapons that keep firing until they're destroyed. The average life expectancy for a guardsman in combat is 15 hours. 15 hours. Not days. Hours. Most die in their first battle. Some survive longer through luck or skill. Veterans who make it through a campaign are transferred to new war zones. rewarded for survival with more chances to die. If you survive long enough, you might become a sergeant, an officer, someone whose experience is valued enough to be preserved. But even officers die. War consumes everything. The only way out of the guard is death or crippling injury. And if you're injured, you become a servitor, lobotomized, your body repurposed for labor or combat. Either way, you continue serving. There's no retirement, no discharge, no peaceful end. You're born on your world. You're taken for the tithe. You're shipped to a war zone. You fight. You die. Your body is recycled. Your equipment is cleaned and given to your replacement. The Emperor protects, but the guard is what he protects with. And the guard is made of meat and fear and orders. Some institutions exist in the light, have official roles, public faces. The Inquisition is not one of them. They operate in shadow. Their authority comes directly from the Emperor, theoretically. In practice, they're accountable to no one. An inquisitor can commandeer armies, execute governors, order exterminatus, and never explain why. Their judgment is final. Their actions beyond question. 3 major ordos divide the Inquisition's focus. Ordo Malleus hunts demons. They're the specialists in chaos. They know the signs of corruption, the subtle changes in behavior that indicate warp influence. They work closely with the Grey Knights, the demon-hunting Space Marine chapter. When a demonic incursion occurs, the Malleus responds. And when the demons are banished, the Malleus purges everyone who witnessed them. Knowledge of chaos is itself corrupting. Better that people die ignorant than live knowing what lurks in the warp. Ordo Xenos hunts aliens. Not all aliens. The military handles most Xenos threats. The Xenos Inquisitors hunt the subtle ones, the Genestealers that infiltrate human populations, the Eldar who manipulate events from behind the scenes, the Tau who subvert imperial worlds with promises of the greater good. They also study Xenos technology carefully, looking for weaknesses, sometimes adopting alien weapons if they prove more effective than imperial alternatives. It's technically heresy. They do it anyway. Results matter more than doctrine. Ordo Hereticus hunts humans. Specifically, humans within the Imperium who've strayed from proper faith. Corrupt priests, governors who abuse their authority, psychers who escape the black ships, chaos cults before they grow large enough to require military intervention. The Hereticus also monitors the Ecclesiarchy, ensures the church doesn't become too powerful, doesn't produce another Vandire. They work with the Sisters of Battle, who serve as their militant arm. Beyond these 3 major ordos, there are dozens of minor ones. Ordo Sicarius hunts assassins. Ordo Scriptorum monitors forbidden texts. Ordo Excorium investigates lost STC technology. Ordo Obsoletus studies threats that no longer exist but might return. Every possible category of danger has an ordo assigned to watch for it. Inquisitors have nearly unlimited authority, but they're not united. They don't operate as a coherent organization. Each Inquisitor is independent, pursuing their own investigations, building their own power bases. Sometimes Inquisitors work together. Sometimes they oppose each other. Sometimes they declare each other heretic and wage private wars that kill millions. There are philosophical factions within the Inquisition. Puritans believe in absolute adherence to doctrine. No compromise, no mercy. Burn everything that's tainted. Better to kill billions of innocents than risk one heretic escaping. Radicals believe the ends justify the means. They'll use chaos artifacts if it helps them fight chaos. They'll ally with Xenos if it serves humanity. They'll sacrifice entire worlds if it saves the Imperium. They're dangerous, potentially corrupted. But sometimes they're the only ones willing to do what's necessary. The tension between Puritans and radicals defines much of the Inquisition's internal politics. Both think they're serving the Emperor. Both think the other side is dangerously wrong. Both have enough power to act on those beliefs. Inquisitors command retinues, personal armies of specialists, interrogators training to become inquisitors themselves, acolytes with specific skills, tech priests, psychers, assassins, soldiers, daemon hosts, daemons bound into human bodies and enslaved, Jokaero weaponsmiths. Whatever resources the Inquisitor can gather. Some Inquisitors are subtle, working in shadow, infiltrating cults, gathering intelligence before striking. Others are blunt, arriving with armies, declaring exterminatus at the first sign of corruption. Both approaches work. Both have their place. The Inquisition's strength is its flexibility. Its weakness is its lack of coordination. No central authority means no strategic direction. Each Inquisitor pursues their own agenda. Sometimes those agendas align. Sometimes they conflict. But the Inquisition endures. Because in an empire where anyone might be corrupted, where any planet might harbor heresy, where trust is suicide, someone has to watch. Someone has to be paranoid on behalf of humanity. Someone has to be willing to make the terrible decisions. The Inquisition is that someone. Judge, jury, and executioner, operating without oversight, making choices that damn millions to save billions. They're necessary, they're terrifying, and they're absolutely convinced they're doing the right thing, which might be the most dangerous thing about them. 10,000 years after the heresy, the Space Marines are both more and less than they were. The legions are gone. But the chapters carry on their legacy. Each chapter is autonomous, rules its own recruiting world, maintains its own fortress monastery, follows its own traditions. Some are codex compliant, following Guilliman's organizational structure precisely. Others maintain divergent practices that border on heresy, but are tolerated because they're effective. The Ultramarines and their successors are the standard. Disciplined, organized, tactically flexible. They follow the Codex. They cooperate with imperial authorities. They're what the Imperium wishes all chapters were. The Blood Angels carry a curse. Their gene seed is flawed. Slowly, inevitably, every Blood Angel succumbs to the red thirst, an uncontrollable hunger for blood, or worse, the Black Rage, a psychic echo of their Primarch Sanguinius's death, causing them to believe they're fighting Horus on the vengeful spirit. When the rage takes them, they're confined to the Death Company, painted black, given weapons, and thrown at the enemy to die gloriously. The Space Wolves barely pretend to follow the Codex. They maintain great companies numbering in the hundreds rather than companies of 100. They recruit only from Fenris. Their gene seed causes mutations, enhanced senses, fangs, sometimes worse. They call themselves the Vulca Fenrica, the Wolves of Fenris. They call everyone else the Lost. They're savage, loyal, and completely uncontrollable by any authority except their own. The Dark Angels hunt the fallen. Their dark secret, half their legion turned traitor on Caliban during the heresy. These fallen Dark Angels were scattered through time and space by the warp. Now the Dark Angels hunt them obsessively. Abandon battles mid-fight if they detect a fallen's presence. Torture prisoners for information. Keep secrets from other chapters, from the Inquisition, from everyone. Their loyalty to the Emperor is absolute, but their first loyalty is to their shame. The Salamanders are the most humane chapter. They value civilian lives, won't sacrifice innocents for tactical advantage. They're slower to respond, more cautious, but they're beloved by the populations they defend. Their gene seed makes their skin charcoal black and their eyes burn red. They're craftsmen as much as warriors. Every salamander creates their own armor, their own weapons. It's meditation, therapy, a way to remember they were human once. The Iron Hands are the opposite. They see flesh as weakness, replace body parts with bionics, even when those parts are healthy. Their chapter master is entombed in a dreadnought. Their warriors compete to see who can augment themselves most extensively. They're cold, logical, brutal in their efficiency, and they hate weakness in all its forms. The Raven Guard specialize in stealth, infiltration, assassination. They strike from shadow, avoid direct confrontation when possible. Their gene seed is corrupted. Many are born without functioning mucranoid or Betcher's gland organs. But they're the Imperium's best at covert operations. When you need a target eliminated quietly, you call the Raven Guard. The Imperial Fists are the Emperor's Praetorians, defenders of Terra, masters of siege warfare, both offensive and defensive. They practice pain glove rituals, placing their hands in devices that cause agonizing pain, to build mental discipline. They're stubborn, unbreaking. They hold when anyone else would retreat, and they never, ever compromise. The Black Templars are the largest chapter. They ignore the Codex's 1,000 marine limit completely. They crusade constantly, never stopping. Crusade fleets numbering thousands of marines scattered across the galaxy. They're zealots, even by Astartes standards. Their chaplains are their chapter masters. Faith drives them more than tactics. They're brutal, intolerant, and devastatingly effective. Every chapter has its own character, its own traditions. Some recruit from death worlds and value survival skills. Others recruit from hive worlds and value tactical acumen. Some maintain close ties to their successor chapters. Others barely acknowledge their genetic cousins. But they're all Space Marines, angels of death, the Emperor's finest warriors, and they all believe absolutely that they're humanity's shield, worth any sacrifice, justified in any action, because without them, the Imperium would have fallen millennia ago, and they know it. Let's talk about technology, about why the Imperium in M41 is technologically stagnant, why innovation is forbidden, why new is treated as synonymous with heretical. The answer lies in accumulated trauma. The men of iron rebelled. AI tried to exterminate humanity. That's lesson 1. Never create thinking machines. Never build something smarter than you. Never give metal the capacity for independent decision-making. The dark age of technology ended in catastrophe. The wonders that humanity achieved led directly to our near extinction. Advanced technology failed. Systems too complex to understand broke down and couldn't be repaired. Colonies died because they couldn't maintain what their ancestors had built. That's lesson 2. Complexity is dangerous. Understand what you build. Maintain what you have. Don't create systems so advanced that no one comprehends how they work. The heresy proved that even Primarchs could fall, that the brightest, strongest, most trusted leaders could be corrupted. If they could fall, anyone could. Anything could be tainted. That's lesson 3. Change is corruption. What was blessed before is safe. What's new might be tainted. Better to use designs that have proven pure across millennia than risk innovation that might harbor corruption. The Mechanicus formalized these lessons into doctrine. The STC was perfect. The Omnissia's gift to humanity contained all necessary knowledge. To suggest improvement is to suggest the Omnissia was wrong. Heresy. Innovation without understanding is tech heresy. Creating new designs without finding an STC precedent is tech heresy. Even making minor modifications without proper ritual is tech heresy. The result is technological stagnation. The Imperium in M41 is less advanced than the Imperium in M30, which was vastly less advanced than humanity in M25. Every millennium brings loss rather than progress. Knowledge forgotten. Techniques lost. Designs degraded into cargo cult rituals that work, but no one knows why. Take the laser gun. Standard Imperial Guard weapon. Simple, reliable, effective. It's based on a design from the dark age of technology. The Imperium can manufacture billions of them. But if you ask a tech priest how it actually works, most can't tell you. They know the prayers to recite during assembly. They know the proper angle for each component. They know the rituals that appease the machine spirit. But the physics, the actual engineering principles, lost, unnecessary. The gun works. That's what matters. This is true for everything. Void ships are maintained through ritual. Plasma reactors are blessed rather than understood. When something breaks, you pray to the machine spirit and hope the cargo cult repairs work. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the machine explodes and kills everyone. But you never, ever try something new. Because new means untested. Untested means potentially corrupted. And corruption means damnation. There are exceptions. The Adeptus Mechanicus does innovate sometimes, but they frame it as rediscovery, as finding lost STC patterns, as piecing together fragmentary data from ancient archives. They call it archaeological research, not engineering development. The Tau mock humanity for this. The Tau Empire is young, barely 6,000 years old. They've had multiple technological leaps in that time. They innovate constantly, improve their weapons, develop new strategies, and they don't understand why humanity doesn't do the same. The answer is, humanity tried innovation. It killed us. We learned our lesson. Better to stagnate than risk another fall. Better to slowly decline than gamble on progress that might end in catastrophe. It's not ideal. It's not even good. But it's safer. And safety is the only thing the Imperium has left to cling to. So, we've traced 10,000 years in about an hour, from the second founding through the age of apostasy, through the Plague of Unbelief and the Macharian Crusade, through the tyrannic wars and Armageddon, through the endless grinding conflicts that define existence in M41. We've seen how the Imperium functions, how the bureaucracy stumbles forward through sheer inertia, how the Ecclesiarchy provides meaning through suffering, how the Guard fights and dies in waves, how the Space Marines stand as shields that can't break, how the Inquisition watches everyone, including itself. We've seen how a dream of rational secular empire became a theocratic nightmare, how the imperial truth died and was replaced by the imperial cult, how innovation became heresy and stagnation became virtue. how survival became the only goal and everything else was sacrificed to achieve it. This is the Imperium of Man in M41, the age of the Imperium, the long midnight that stretched from the heresy's end to the brink of something worse. It's not the galaxy the Emperor envisioned. It's not even close. It's oppressive, brutal, unjust in ways that make tyranny look merciful. It survives through faith, fear, and the daily sacrifice of millions. But it survives. For 10,000 years, against impossible odds, facing enemies that should have destroyed it 100 times over. It survives. That counts for something. Maybe not much, maybe not enough. But it's more than the Eldari achieved, more than the Necrons managed before their sleep, more than any other human civilization in the galaxy's history. The Imperium endures, broken, degraded, running on momentum and prayer, but still standing, still fighting, still refusing to die. When we return for Part 5, we'll see what happens when that refusal is finally tested, when the galaxy itself tears in half, when Guilliman returns after 10,000 years and sees what his father's empire has become, when the 42nd millennium begins and every nightmare comes true at once. We'll watch the age of the Imperium end and the age of the Dark Imperium begin. We'll see whether hope can survive in a universe that's been grinding it down for 10 millennia. Whether faith can overcome the darkness that's literally split the galaxy. Whether humanity has anything left to fight with except spite and stubbornness. But that's for next time. For now, let this settle. 10,000 years of managed decline, of wars that never end and victories that mean only survival, of institutions grinding forward without knowing why, of faith replacing reason, of suffering accepted as sacred, of billions living and dying without ever mattering to anyone beyond their immediate circle. This is the Imperium. This is what the Emperor's vision became. This is the price humanity paid for unity, for survival, for refusing to surrender to a galaxy that wants us dead. Sleep now if you can. Dream of better worlds, of empires that don't run on fear, of gods that don't demand daily sacrifice, of species that found another way. Then wake and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Not because humanity chose it, but because war is all that's left after 10,000 years of barely surviving. The Emperor protects through bureaucracy and faith, through space marines and guard regiments, through inquisitors and sisters of battle, through 1,000,000 daily compromises that turn good people into weapons. The Emperor protects. hearts, even if protection looks like damnation, even if the price is everything we were supposed to be. Until Part 5. May you rest in the knowledge that somewhere, across 1,000,000 worlds, someone is suffering so you don't have to. That their sacrifice, willing or not, keeps the wheels turning, keeps the Imperium standing. That's not comfort, but it's the only truth the 41st millennium offers. Good night. If you're still here, maybe start the next episode, or just let the quiet take you. And if you've already drifted off, that's all right. Good night, traveler. Sleep well beneath the stars.